to Trellised Table. This is Simon. Today we've got the second part of our episode interviewing Steve Miller, the hop specialist at Cornell Cooperative Extension. Sure, I'm glad to have you back. As always, if you enjoy Trellised Table, please subscribe with your podcasting software or application of choice. And if you like us, definitely get onto iTunes and leave a review. That makes a big difference. You can also find us on the web at trellis2table.com. Okay, let's do this thing.
Well, absolutely it is. Certainly the macro brewers are seeing their sales decline some, and some is lost to imports, and a lot of it's being lost to craft production. And craft brewers use a lot more hops per barrel than the macro brewers do. So there's really creating a lot of new opportunities. And I think that the U.S. Brewers Association expects that we need about 12,000 acres more craft or more aroma type hops planted by 2020.
Wow.
Than we have currently right now.
That's a lot more acres.
That's a lot more acres. When you look at the current acreage out of the Pacific Northwest has been around 30,000 or so. At high points it's been up to 40, and so that's a big increase. You'll see that out there they're taking out a lot of their high alpha hops and replacing those with aroma hops, and that's been going on for the last several years.
Okay. And why is that? It's a matter of salability?
It's a matter of what the breweries are asking for.
Mm-hmm. Earlier you said that the farmers who started growing hops 10 years ago, 15 years ago, had to make all their mistakes, right?
Yes.
Can you maybe tell a story or relate to us what some of those mistakes are so that someone getting started or thinking about getting started can avoid making them themselves?
Yeah, a number of things. I mean, one is the choice of varieties, and we definitely want to make sure that you're choosing varieties that have some disease resistance. And some varieties, maybe brewers will tell you they want this or that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that those varieties are going to do well under our circumstances. So that's one of the things that people need to look into. Other mistakes were how close they needed to be planted. To really have a good commercial yard now, we need to be using what's called a V-trellis, where you have two strings coming up from each plant in kind of a V shape. And that means the rows need to be about 14 feet apart. And early on, people were planting just single-strand trellises that went straight up, and they were putting them as close as 10 feet apart. And we've definitely found out that 10 feet apart is way too close. Even 12 feet is 12 feet's okay for a single-strand trellis, but anybody putting up a V trellis, they need to be at 14 feet.
And that's 14 feet between rows, is that right?
Between rows. Okay. Height-wise, they need to be around 18 feet.
Okay. And the 14 feet is for airflow or vehicle traffic or?
Both.
Okay.
Both. Yeah, you want good sunlight and good airflow. You want a lot of space between it. And certainly out, again, in the Pacific Northwest, where they're looking at land prices are so expensive, and they have to irrigate on a daily basis because they don't get any rainfall or very little. Just to put that in perspective, the Yakima Valley gets about 7-8 inches of rain over the course of an entire year.
Oh, wow.
We average about 3.5 inches of rain every month.
Right.
So
that's different.
Yeah, so they have a significant cost of both the land and irrigation, and so they try to put things as close together as they can to maximize their yields. I mean, they're really growing hops as a commodity and have to maximize their yields, reduce their labor, and those are some things that we can do a little differently here.
And when you say things we can do differently, you mean not having to spend as much on irrigation?
I'd rather plant them further apart, for example, than having them too close.
I see.
Because of disease and maximizing sunlight, and things like that.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was that one of the big problems facing hop growers in the Northeast today is a lack of information or a lack of good information.
Mm-hmm.
What resources would you recommend a new grower or a person looking to become a grower? Like, what sort of educational resources would you recommend?
Well, I get a lot of phone calls and emails on a daily basis from people who want to, start growing hops, and so I send them a packet of information that things I put together to get them started, and then in that packet there's also a list of places that they can go to get more information, such as the Northeast Hop Alliance.org website. The UVM up in Burlington, their website, they have a very good site with lots of information on making small-scale equipment and their research that they're doing in their hop yard there. So they've got a lot on their site. And certainly for people in the Northeast, those are the two best places to go to get information, and there's a lot of resources on both. We have a Cornell guidelines that is available for growing hops, and it's not just on pest management, but also on site selection and a number of the things that you and I have been talking about. So that's available to people, and it's under $30, so you can get that directly from Cornell or through many of the extension offices might have that.
Sure, and we'll have a link to all of this on the show page as well.
Okay. And then there's actually a new publication coming out that I'm reviewing right now called the Hop Growers Handbook, and that's being written by a couple of growers in New York State over in the Albany area. And again, people who started out and made a lot of mistakes and have learned a lot and done a lot of research to kind of filter out the things that are kind of anecdotal and not necessarily that they really work.
Sure.
To putting down information in a organized fashion that people can. I want to start growing hops. I think this handbook is going to be very valuable to a lot of people who want to use that as a resource.
Oh, that's quite a recommendation. That's great.
And it actually is the Hop Growers Handbook, and it's by Laura Tenike and Dietrich Gehring of Indian Ladder Farms over in the Albany area. And my understanding is that it's going to be published by September. I'm reviewing some of the copy right now.
Very good. That's awesome. That's awesome to hear. That sort of literature, is going to be huge.
Yeah, because a lot of what's on the internet is out there from people who are interested in their home brewers, or they're growing 15 or 20 hop plants, and that's really, that kind of information isn't all that useful for people who want to do this commercially, and that's really that's who I work with. I think that's what this handbook is out there to help people that are interested in that. And you asked me earlier about how the industry grew, and I didn't really finish that completely. That people were starting to grow hops here, and because of having to hand harvest, you really couldn't grow more than about maybe a third of an acre.
Okay.
And that's what everybody started with. Put out 200 or 300 plants. Invite all your friends once you have a harvest to come and pick, and have some beer and hot dogs and have a good time. Well, that only goes for so long, and now I want to plant an acre or 2 acres or 3 acres, and there's just not enough people to do that. So we had one mechanical hop harvester in the state that was purchased about 15 years ago, and that was privately owned by one grower. And then the Hop Alliance purchased one with a grant, and that has been at Morrisville College for the last 5 or 6 years. And a number of people in central New York use that harvester as a wolf harvester to get the crop picked. These are stationary machines, though, so you've got to be close enough to one in order to use it.
I see.
Well, we're up to 16 wolf harvesters in the state now.
Oh.
Last year I went to Poland and we bought 4 of them, and we bought some dryers, and there are a number of growers who have purchased wolf harvesters now. But again, these are small scale when you look at what's used out in the Pacific Northwest. These are machines that are in the $30,000 range, something like that, to buy them and get them here and refurbish them. Some cost more than that. But they can handle about 20 acres or more of hops. So in order for us to have gotten up to 300 acres in the state, we literally need 15 or 20 of these machines in order to get that crop picked. And that's going to continue. If we continue to plant, we're going to have either more of these machines or some other small ones, or even some larger ones in some cases. If somebody puts in 50 or 100 acres, they'll be looking at something larger than a Wolf 170 or 140.
Can you talk a little bit about post-harvest processing, how farmers in our area approach things like pelletizing and shipping?
That's so important because the great majority of brewers want the dried pelleted hops. That's the way they're used to using them, and that works best with their brewing equipment. So many of the growers who started 5-10 years ago were selling most of their hops as fresh, wet hops, and we're able to sell them all that way. But there's most of the brewers want to be able to use them year round. So wet hops are not an option that way.
Right.
And you've got to dry them first and then bale them up. Hops deteriorate with oxygen and heat and light. So everything you do from the point of drying on is keeping them in the dark, keeping them cold, and keeping them from being oxidized. So as soon as they're dried, they're compressed into bales and put in a walk-in cooler or some kind of a cold storage. That then, after they've been baled, they can be pelleted. And they're, again, 5-6 years ago, we didn't have anybody that was able to pellet in the state, and that was an issue, just like we didn't have enough harvesters. We now have about 6 companies in the state that are pelleting hops, and quite honestly, we probably have more capacity than what is required, certainly for the size industry that we have now. So I don't encourage a lot of new people to go out and borrow a lot of money to set up pelleting facilities, because at least right now we don't have enough quantity and supply to warrant a lot more pelleting companies. Hopefully, if somebody's going to borrow that kind of money, they need to have enough supply to be able to make money and pay off their investment.
Right.
But I think there's enough out there now. Maybe there isn't one right next to you, but you might have to. And once they're baled, it doesn't cost that much to truck them, because baled hops are compressed to the point where they're in 50 or 100 pound bales, sometimes smaller, and they're easily transported to be someplace to be pelleted. And the pelleting companies that are out there are also set up to do nitrogen flush packaging in mylar bags. So I think there's that's available now. We just didn't have that 5 or 6 years ago.
That's a good thing, right?
Yeah, because again, in order to have an industry that's complete and that's going to be successful, you really have to have all parts of it, not just growing, but the marketing and processing and packaging available to everybody.
Can you talk a little bit more about that marketing piece?
Well, up till now, most of the growers have been knocking on the doors and calling on brewers to bring some of their hops. And I think now as the industry is getting larger and there's more brewers that have used them and tried them, we got brewers who are actively seeking out those hops. And the New York State Brewers Association does have a website where they list hop growers on there, can put their information on that site. The Northeast Hop Alliance has 2 pages on their website. One is a page that has links to any grower and that's a member that wants to have a link to their own personal site that will take people to what they've got available. And then the Hop Alliance also has a page that's like a map that you can click on individual growers to get their contact information.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
There's some growers that might not have their own web page yet,
Sure.
But they can put their information on that map. So there's at least 3 ways that people can, brewers can find them. And then last year we had our first hop evaluation that we did at our conference in December. It's the first week of December. And we had growers supply hops for brewers to come in and evaluate them, smell them, look at the analysis and kind of determine if they want to buy some. And we did have a number of brewers bought hops right on site there. And this year our hop evaluation is going to be in October rather than in December because we want to get
fresh hops.
The brewers to see what's out fresh. And they like to see the hops before they've been pelleted.
Okay.
Even though they don't necessarily use them as whole leaf hops, they like to evaluate them as whole leaf hops.
Gotcha.
And so last year, most of the hops had been pelleted by December, so we're changing that to do it in October. And I think we had 18 brewers last year, and we hope to have a lot more than that participate this year.
Let me ask you one kind of final big question. Maybe not final, but a big question. When you zoom out and look at the next 10 years, the next 15 years, what do you see as the big obstacles that farmers growing hops in our region face?
Well, I think, first of all, right now, the industry is moving more towards aroma varieties, and that out west as well as here and in the Midwest. So I think people need to be looking in that direction. A lot of the varieties that are going to come available, they're really fantastic varieties. Like there's a big demand for Amarillo and Citra and varieties like that. Those are privately owned, and they're not available to most growers outside of just a few in the Pacific Northwest that those companies have leased the rights to. And I think eventually we are going to need to have some varieties that have disease resistance as well as some unique qualities with our soils and climate.
Okay.
That can compete on that scale, so that everybody wants Citra. We can have varieties like that here. There's no reason why we can't, but it takes quite an investment to do that, and literally 10 years of plant breeding to bring seedlings to a point where they're being used in the industry, because we definitely, you can get thousands of seedlings out there, and if they don't have the disease resistance and the agronomic qualities of being able to produce a decent yield. They can be the tastiest hop that anybody's ever had, but nobody's going to grow them because they can't get enough money for them.
Sure, the return on investment isn't sufficient.
So I think that's one of the things that's going to really be needed to see the industry expand beyond 500 or 1,000 acres, and I think that disease resistance is very important here. That's part of why the industry failed back 100 years ago, and we don't want to see a repeat of that. So, the issue is that we don't have as many acres as we have for something like apples or cherries or even corn varieties. So it's difficult to put that kind of money into it. And I'm actually, we wrote a grant with a number of other states that I talked about earlier, and we're hoping that we do get that grant, because one of the things that we're looking to do in that is some plant breeding and selecting for disease-resistant varieties that could have some unique qualities for the Northeast.
Cool. And that will be done through Cornell?
Well, it's actually, the money comes from USDA. It's a Specialty Crop Research Initiative, and Vermont was the lead group in that, but there's about 10 states that are involved in that, and New York being one of them.
Very good.
So we'll know about that by, I think, September, October, whether we get that money, and but then it's still a kind of a long-term project. But I think that's one of the things to look at now. This is not I don't think any of us see this as a fly-by-night, a short-term thing. It's really good for the hop industry overall to have some diversity in the production areas of the country, whether it's, we've got about 2 to 3% of the total acreage outside of the Pacific Northwest now. And 10 years ago, there was almost none.
Okay, really?
So Michigan, New York, Wisconsin, Ohio, the Northeast, even Minnesota, there's Indiana. We've got a number of states that are cooperating on these efforts, and I think we're going to see the acreage continue to increase. But there are things that we need to do to be able to produce hops, both quality-wise and at a price that brewers can afford to pay for.
It sounds like there are bright times ahead if everybody's willing to put in the work.
It's I think there's great opportunities there because we're working with an industry that's expanding, and if you can't do it while the the brewing industry is expanding, then it's unlikely that we'd be able to do it anytime. So to be able to get a foothold in that business when we know that there's at least another 10,000, 12,000 acres needed, we can be part of that.
Awesome. As we kind of wind it down, can I ask you what you're drinking these days, Steve? Do you have any beers that are really exciting?
I think everybody asks me that. They think because of this job that there's over 4,000 breweries in the country now, and believe it or not, I have not had all of their beers. So I have my own personal preferences, probably like everybody else does, but try a lot of different types. Mostly New York State beers, though.
Awesome.
There's over 200 brewers in New York, and they all come up with new things. So I have a difficult enough time trying to keep up with those.
Fair enough. Thank you so much for talking with me today, Steve. I really appreciate it. I feel like you have just laid down this enormous amount of knowledge, and I'm really excited that we're going to have a chance to share it with so many people.
Yeah, people can, if they're interested in growing, I think they should give myself an email or Heather Darby up in Vermont if they're in that area, and we're always glad to talk to people who are interested in investing in growing hops.